A parish priest is murdered for performing a sacrament of the church, and the trial of his killer grips the nation for months. Tonight, it's anything but law and order as we look at a 90-year-old murder case which happened right here in Birmingham, Alabama, and still has people talking. So please stay with us. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to Ewtn Live, which is our chance to bring you guests from all over the world. Before I get to our guest tonight, I just want to throw out a big old happy birthday to young Cameron Traeger. I met his family and him a couple weeks ago while I was giving a retreat, and he turns, I think, 7 years old now. So, Cameron, happy birthday. Now, our guest tonight is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, and she's currently a professor of criminal law and procedure at the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State University. And she's the author of a new book entitled Rising Road, A True Tale of Love, Race, and Religion in America, based on the true story of the 1921 murder of Birmingham, Alabama Catholic priest, Father James E. Coyle. So please welcome Professor Sharon Davies. Professor Davies.
Thank you, Father.
It's a delight to have you here. I was able to read your book, Rising Road, last week, and I really enjoyed it. So I've been looking forward to this meeting with you. First of all, give us a little bit of background of what Birmingham, Alabama was like. I mean, you do a nice history. I learned a lot about the history of Birmingham itself. Give a little background of the situation in which this murder occurred.
Okay, so it's 1921, Birmingham, Alabama. It is a time when there are huge numbers of immigrants coming into the country, largely from South and Eastern Europe. They're coming in with languages that are different from ours, skin tones that are slightly darker than ours. We're talking about Greeks and Italians and Jews and Lebanese and folks who were suspected of not having sufficient allegiance to traditional American values. A lot of Native Americans thought. And that mindset was very much a part of what was going on in Birmingham, Alabama in 1921.
And also, just so that folks understand, Birmingham itself needed these workers because the iron, steel, and coal industry was booming.
That's right, Father.
And that was really there was a need for them, but folks didn't like their need.
Well, you know, they needed the laborers to be sure, but what they were suspicious of was new immigrant groups who were coming in who might not pay sufficient attention to, for example, white hierarchy in the country.
What do you mean by white hierarchy?
Well, what I mean is that there was a settled racial order that existed at that time in America. And it was very clear in Birmingham and elsewhere, this was the age of Jim Crow. So the races were very sharply segregated in basically every aspect of life that we can imagine, right? And so that would include schools for sure, but residences, churches,
hotels,
restaurants, any place where there were interactions. There was a close policing of the races, and there were laws that prohibited, for example, whites from marrying blacks or any descendants of blacks at that time that existed here. And
even if somebody was only partially black, if they were mixed race themselves,
that's right.
That was enough to say you couldn't do that again.
Or no license would be issued to a couple who wanted to marry in that situation. And it was also a crime for any pastor who was aware of that to help them get married against those laws. So all of that would have been criminalized at the time. And it really, it was a time when law was used to support what we thought in America about racial relationships and also religions in America. This was also a time in Birmingham where there were laws in Alabama and other states that made it possible for state officials to inspect Catholic buildings for people who might be held there against their will, and also for ammunitions.
So folks understand, again, this is in the 1921, and the law said that they were afraid Catholic convents and monasteries were kidnapping people and holding them against their will. Because there were stories, you write about this, there were stories by Maria Monk and others that were these lurid tales, totally false.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I don't know if you knew this, but on a trial, Maria Monk, her mother was on the witness stand and said, well, she never was quite the same after she put that pencil into her temple.
Yeah.
You know, so,
yeah. I know.
So people believed these stories, so laws were enacted to inspect only Catholic places.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, it's interesting that we've forgotten about these laws, but these laws actually authorized the inspection of Catholic convents, rectories, churches, even Catholic-owned hospitals for what people feared was being held there. And part of what they feared was ammunitions, because there was a very widespread fear at this time in America that Catholics were waiting for the day when their leader, a foreign leader, the Pope, would call for an insurrection, and then the Knights of Columbus, his foot soldiers, would go and they would retrieve these weapons from their basements and they would start the insurrection. Now, everyone that I talked to about that today, Father, laughs at that.
I know. Well, I'm a Knight of Columbus. As a matter of fact, I have my Knight of Columbus boot on, you know. But the only weapons I stockpile are for hunting purposes.
Well, you know.
So the deer have a reason to be afraid, but the Protestants are okay.
It is funny to our ears today, but it was so widespread and it was so serious that state legislatures passed these laws that authorized these inspections to be made without a warrant. And if anyone told anyone in those Catholic buildings that the inspectors were on their way, they would be committing a separate crime themselves. So they had to be surprised inspections that were going on. These are convent inspection laws that hardly anybody even remembers existed today, but they did, and they were part of the climate, really, that existed against Catholics at that time in America.
Another part of that climate were organizations like the Masonic Lodge, which had a very anti-Catholic quality to it, and the Ku Klux Klan, which was not only anti-African American, but it was also anti-Jewish and anti-Catholic.
And anti-foreigner.
And anti-foreigner.
That's right. And this is something, too, that I think that we really haven't paid nearly enough attention to as historians and scholars is that aspect of the Ku Klux Klan. Because during this time, now this was the Klan of the 1920s. This was not the first Klan. This was the second Klan.
Right.
And the second Klan was the most popular Klan in the history of the United States. Right. The reason why they were that popular, and they were able to attract into their ranks the men that they were able to attract, professional men, lawyers, doctors, judges, law enforcement officers, and members of the Protestant clergy. They were able to do that because this was a phase of the Klan that rebranded itself as a patriotic fraternal organization, an organization that was dedicated to the defense of the United States. Against who? Against all those immigrants coming in who weren't sufficiently connected to the country. This was in the lead up to World War I, when whenever we're at war, we see rises in demands for external displays of our patriotism, and that was happening now. And Catholics in particular were said to never be able to be patriots. Right. Why? Because they owed their allegiance to a foreign leader.
The Pope.
The Pope.
Now, this is some of the background. Tell us about Father James Coyle.
Well, Father Coyle was actually really a remarkable priest who, it's a little bit stunning that we have forgotten him in his story. Father Coyle was a rare kind of person who was willing to stand up to very dangerous, threatening people, members of the Ku Klux Klan who are traveling around the streets of Birmingham and engaging in acts of violence and burning churches and
marking him out specifically for murder.
That's right. There were threats against his life that the federal agents from Washington, D.C. were intercepting before 1921. In November of 1920, a reporter for The Nation wrote about Birmingham and the intense anti-Catholic atmosphere that existed here, and mentioned that death threats had been intercepted against this priest, Father James Coyle, the lead priest of St. Paul's Catholic community here in Birmingham.
Now, one of the reasons that he was singled out is that he was a good writer, and he had a good use of the language. As many of the Irish do. The Irish have an ability to lilt with the language and just do a beautiful job, as seen by so many great writers. And he was able to write letters to the editor, defending the church against these spurious attacks that were also published in the press.
Right, and he was very smart. He could actually write circles around most of the detractors of his faith, and he did so on a regular basis. But every time Father Coyle wrote a letter to the editor of one of the newspapers here in town, he would invite a flurry of letters in response that really showed openly, unapologetically, the anti-Catholic hatred, really, that existed here in Birmingham, and not really just Birmingham. It would be a mistake to think of this as only a story about this city or this state. In fact, it was a story that was going on around the country at this time. But it was particularly bad here. And Father Coyle, because he was willing to do what he did in openly, publicly defending his faith over and over again, became the most well-known Catholic in the state of Alabama, I think it's fair to say, at that time. And despised by the people who held those views about the Catholic Church.
One of the people who held these strongly anti-Catholic views, pro-Ku Klux Klan and pro-nativist and all this, was Reverend Edwin Stephenson.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about him and how it led to his committing murder against Father Coyle.
Yeah. Well, Reverend Edwin Stephenson had been living with his wife and his daughter. They had one child. Her name was Ruth. And he was a Methodist minister. He was an ordained Methodist minister. He never had an official pastorate, but he at one point began to rely on his credentials to marry people, ironically, in the Jefferson County Courthouse downtown, that existed downtown in Birmingham on 3rd Avenue at the time.
Right next to the cathedral.
On the same block
Right.
as St. Paul's Catholic Church at that time,
Right.
later
Right now it's the
St.
cathedral.
Paul's Cathedral. Where Father Coyle, and right in between those two massive buildings, in fact, was the rectory of St. Paul's, where Father Coyle lived. So Reverend Edwin Stephenson made his money for his family by marrying young couples who found their way into the Jefferson County Courthouse and got their licenses there, and he would marry them in the hallways after identifying what they were there for. He was a Klansman himself, rabidly anti-Catholic, and very, very disturbed to come to realize that his daughter Ruth was somehow attracted to this hated religion. He and his wife Mary realized that actually when Ruth was still in early adolescence.
Yeah, when she was about 12 years old, she showed interest.
Right, and he discovered her actually on the porch, sitting with Father Coyle one day, talking to him, and he was furious when she was only 12. That began a series of very ugly events in their household between Mary and Edwin Stephenson and their daughter Ruth for a series of years, because Ruth never gave up her desire to actually become a Catholic. She had to wait until she was 18 to do it lawfully under state law, and when she turned 18, she secretly converted to Catholicism. She found her way to Our Lady of Sorrows here in Birmingham.
Still one of the big parishes in town.
Yes, and she was baptized there, and she kept it a secret for as long as she could from her parents, because she knew that they wouldn't accept it. And when they found out, some very physically ugly things happened to her at the hands of her father, as he tried to convince her that no matter what the law said, she didn't really have the freedom to make that choice herself. And so that was...
As I recall, she described that she was tied to the bed and beaten.
That's right. She said that when her father found out that she converted to Catholicism, he nailed the windows of her bedroom shut. Her mother stuck a rag in her mouth to suppress her screams, while her father beat her until she promised them that she would give up on that plan. So that was the state of affairs in the Stephensons' household on August 11th, 1921, when Ruth made the decision to run away from her job in the middle of the day and to marry a man that she had known for some years, a man named Pedro Guzman, who was a Catholic. And a migrant from Puerto Rico. And the two of them slipped away from their jobs in the middle of the day, and they went and they got their marriage license. They found their way to St. Paul's Church, and Father Coyle was the priest who took their wedding vows.
Yeah, because he was the pastor, only he had the authority in church law to do the wedding so quickly without the banns of marriage. So
Right.
he did the wedding, and what happened to Father Coyle?
Well, about an hour, a little over an hour later, he was sitting on the porch of his home, the rectory, and Reverend Edwin Stephenson walked up the walkway up to the porch. What happened exactly in those ensuing moments would be the subject of contention for the next several months. But some things were absolutely clear. One was that he carried with him a loaded gun. Another was that he shot 3 bullets from that gun, and one of them pierced the left temple of Father James Coyle, quickly causing his death. And the last thing was that he surrendered himself right away.
Yeah, he didn't run away at all. He walked into the courthouse.
Exactly, and he surrendered, and it was probably a good thing that he did, because he committed those acts in front of a street full of witnesses. This was downtown Birmingham, 3rd Avenue, a busy downtown street. There were people all over the street who heard the shots, saw him step down from the porch. So there never was a question about the identity of the killer of Father James Coyle. The big question, given that climate that we were talking about, was whether a veteran prosecutor and his assistants would be able to bring the minister to justice.
That became the big question, because the minister surrendered, and he gave his gun over to the police, and he wanted them to to put him in custody. He was all easy and agreeable, didn't fight one bit, and had a remarkable confidence about all this. That's one of the striking things. But what did he use for his defense?
Well, it shifted over time. At first, when he didn't have the benefit of legal counsel, his first explanation was that he shot Father Coyle in self-defense. Now, it was a difficult claim from the very beginning, because there's this street full of witnesses. Stephenson claimed that the two of them got into a fight once he realized that Father Coyle had married his daughter Ruth to Pedro Guzman. But he said he didn't know that when he first approached the house, that he was just there for an amiable chat with the priest. He had been looking for his daughter and happened to find his way there. And so they were in a friendly conversation when he learned that his daughter had been married to Pedro Guzman. And he said he shouted at Father Coyle at that point, and Father Coyle knocked him down, punched him, kicked him in his side, put him in fear for his life. So he had to pull the gun that he happened to have with him, and he shot. That was his initial explanation. But it was tough, because those witnesses didn't see a fight between two full-grown men on that porch before they saw the shots and him step off the porch.
And there was no sign of a violent struggle on the porch.
That's right.
Father Coyle had some papers and his breviary, piled very neatly on the bench where he was sitting, so none of that was disturbed.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing too that you bring out is that there were no powder burn marks on Father Coyle's body. So had he shot him at close range, that would have been there, and it wasn't.
And worse for Stephenson was the trajectory of the bullets themselves, which were later identified. And the trajectory of the bullets were arcing downward, not upward, which would have been the case if he had actually shot Father Coyle from his knees, as he said, as Father Coyle was bearing down upon him. And so none of that supported his self-defense claim, but that's what he said initially. His claim changed after the arrival of some lawyers on the scene.
Right. He eventually went to a defense of temporary insanity.
Temporary insanity. A beautiful thing if it works, because it's temporary, and that means he didn't need to spend a single day down in that insane asylum in nearby Tuscaloosa. If it worked, he could walk out of the courtroom a free man. And that became evident, was going to be part of his defense, a big part of his defense, after his lawyer, his lead lawyer, was hired, who was a young man named Hugo Black. Now, Hugo Black at this time was a young lawyer making a name for himself, a trial lawyer in Birmingham. He would eventually go on, as you know, Father, to reach the greatest heights that a lawyer can reach in our profession. He would eventually spend many decades on the United States Supreme Court as a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, he was appointed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt when Roosevelt expanded the court in the 1930s.
Roosevelt was threatening to expand the court. He had to actually back off of that plan eventually because there was so much opposition. But he did appoint Hugo Black. That was many years after this trial occurred. Hugo Black had before that been elected to the United States Senate and spent some years in the Senate before that. So, but this is 1921. Hugo Black is in his early 30s. He's a trial attorney, and he's hired by the Ku Klux Klan to lead the defense of Reverend Edwin Stephenson.
Even though he himself was not yet a member of the Ku Klux Klan. He would join a couple years later.
Right.
But the Klan hired him to defend Stephenson.
Right.
You know, in the last few minutes, I want to deal with two things. First of all, Father Coyle's funeral was huge.
Massive.
Huge.
The biggest funeral in the history of the state of Alabama at that time. I think it's been exceeded by Bear Bryant, I'm told. But,
it could be.
The true high priest of Alabama, we should say. But yes, I mean, it was massive. And I spend some time on that funeral in the book because you can get a sense of the sorrow of the Birmingham Catholic community and the Catholic community around the country, really. Priests and other bishops came from all over to attend this funeral. And it was just a series of very, very sad
not only was St. Paul's packed, but there was a huge crowd on the street outside,
right.
You know, for the funeral.
Yeah. There was no way that all of the people who wanted to get there could come into St. Paul's Cathedral, which is amazing in and of itself because that is a very large building,
yes,
beautiful church, and it holds over 1,000 people, but it was absolutely packed.
Now, Father Coyle was buried, and the trial takes place sometime later. What happened at the trial? We've got about 5 minutes. What happened at the trial?
Well, the trial, I should say, was even from the start a disappointment for this veteran prosecutor named Joe Tate, because it turned out that all he could try the killer of Father Coyle for was second-degree murder, and that was as a result of what happened in between the shooting and the start of the trial. The grand jury, first of all, was uncharacteristically slow in returning an indictment even against Stephenson, and then when it did, it indicted him for second-degree murder instead of first. So those were early signs for the prosecutor that this was a case, despite all of those witnesses on the street, that would be harder than it ever should have been to convict Reverend Edwin Stephenson for the murder of Father Coyle. And then it was very clear that the defense strategy was going to actually put the Catholic Church itself on trial during its defense. That the only way of defending Reverend Edwin Stephenson was to try to convince the jury that the bigger culprit was the victim of the homicide itself, Father James Coyle. And the way that they went about doing that was to suggest that Reverend Edwin Stephenson and his wife Mary had been tortured for years by the Catholics of Birmingham, who had tried to seduce their daughter away from her rightful religion to this despised religion. And they were playing on the hope that the jurors it would share, basically, Reverend Edwin Stephenson's anti-Catholic views in hearing that defense. That was at least part of it.
And that was a good bet.
At this time. But it wasn't a bet that they were willing to base the entire defense on. They also ultimately pointed to race, which has always been the ultimate trump
Right.
card here and
Right.
elsewhere in America is race. They opened up the question of Pedro Guzman's true race. And suggested, Hugo Black suggested that Pedro Guzman was actually a descendant of a black person, not what he claimed to be. And so
I remembered some of the questioning. They asked Hugo Guzman, "Where are your parents from?" And he said, "Spain."
Right.
And it said, "Can you prove it?" How can you prove where your parents are from?
How do you know? They told me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. No, and it was really one serious question for lawyers about the defense was whether it crossed the line of ethics when it came to that line of questioning, because Pedro Guzman had been living in Birmingham, Alabama for many years.
And as a white man, he was registered as a white.
Yes, exactly. Who was accepted as white in Birmingham, and he ate in white restaurants. Reverend Edwin Stephenson.
His voter registration was white.
It was. Reverend Edwin Stephenson himself had once been a barber, and he had cut Pedro Guzman's hair, which never would have happened in Birmingham, Alabama, if Stephenson himself thought that Guzman was black.
I have just a few seconds left before the break. How did the trial turn out?
Well, the jury was charged after all the evidence was in. They ate dinner together, they said a prayer, and they found Reverend Edwin Stephenson not guilty.
So he walked off a completely free man, not guilty of any crime, not even second-degree murder.
He did.
After killing Father in cold blood. And one of the things that I found fascinating, there was a gentleman named White, his last name was White, who was an actual witness of the attack.
That's right.
And they wouldn't allow him to speak at the trial.
That's right. There was a big argument about it. An eyewitness who disputed everything that Stephenson himself testified about at the trial, but the judge would not allow him to testify. And it later came to be known that the judge himself was a Klansman. The foreman of the jury was a Klansman. 3 out of the 4 defense attorneys at that time were Klansmen, and Hugo Black would soon become one.
And the Klan was paying for it.
And the Klan did fund drives across
so that,
Alabama.
As it turns out, Father Coyle never fought or attacked Reverend Stephenson, but Reverend Stephenson walked up, shot him in cold blood, and that was what the witness actually saw.
That's right.
So he died really as a martyr, not as somebody defending himself.
That's right.
Well, we have to take a little break. We're going to come back with your questions and your comments about this fascinating story of the murder of a priest who murdered for having done a wedding. So please stay with us. Thank you and welcome back. We're with Sharon Davies talking about the murder of Father James Coyle. To learn more about this, you can visit the Father James E. Coyle Memorial Project online at www.fathercoyle.org, fathercoyle.org. And also, this book called Rising Road, is available at EWTN's Religious Catalog. You can order it there. The phone number is 1-800-854-6316. That's 1-800-854-6316. Or you can go online to EWTNReligiousCatalog.com. EWTNReligiousCatalog.com. And we have a nice group of people here, a lot of Texans from different parts of the Republic of Texas. And we love having you and all the other folks who are here with us. If you can join us on a pilgrimage, please contact our pilgrimage department at 205-271-2966. That's 205-271-2966, or go to the website www.ewtn.com, and they'll have all sorts of information. And I don't want you to forget, this weekend, right here in Birmingham, Alabama, just a few blocks down from St. Paul's Cathedral, we are having our EWTN 30th anniversary family celebration. And if you want to find out more information, the tickets are free. The price is good. And you can come there and join us on Saturday and Sunday. We'll have Mass each day and meet a lot of us here from the network. I'll be there, and so will so many of the other folks who do shows here on the network. John Ed is going to be there, and Marcus, and all sorts of folks are going to be there. So Raymond Arroyo will be there. So please join us. And if you want to go to EWTN.com and get more information on it. But come on down. We'd love to see you. Are you ready to take some questions?
Absolutely.
All right, let's start off with a question from our studio audience. Sir, where are you from?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Great. Good to have you. I love Cincinnati. And what is your question?
You mentioned that the murder was witnessed by many people, and I'm wondering how credible the witnesses were, and possibly were they all Catholic?
Well, a big part of the defense strategy was to point out that many of the witnesses that were called by the prosecutor were Catholic, as though that was a good reason to question their credibility, their affiliation with the Catholic Church by itself. Were they credible? It really depends on one's perspective. I certainly found the prosecution's case to be a credible one.
Yeah, looking at I'm not a lawyer or a judge, but looking at the prosecutor's case, it looked like he had, really marshaled up a lot of data to show that at least second-degree murder was a viable charge.
And the defense arguments were just so full of holes, the self-defense claim, for example. And so any jury that wasn't predisposed to buy the defense's argument, I think, would have been convinced that this was murder.
Yeah. Let's take a call. We have John on the line. Hello, John.
Hello, Father Mitch.
Hi, where are you calling from?
Good old Ohio.
Good to have you. And what is your question?
Well, this is for Professor maybe. I wanted to hear maybe more of an expansion on the will and actions of the anti-Catholic people down there. You may have heard of St. Catherine Drexel, and she had so many problems. They were going to have a college for African Americans and Native Americans, and they had to have a third party buy the property. That's the only way they could get the project started. So I'll hang up. Thank you, guys.
I'm not sure that I really understood the question.
Yeah, I think he wanted to know a little bit more about some of these aspects of how the anti-Catholicism and the racism, came into play, and how these laws and social customs were interfering with the church's ability to minister to the white community and to the black community.
Right. Well, it was very clear that part of the reason why Catholics were so disfavored was because of the Catholic Church's openness toward blacks, and in particular, the education of young black children at that time. The Catholic Church would take into their Catholic schools and would educate alongside of white children. Now that was something that was taboo in the South. And also the Catholic Church's openness to black parishioners in a way that made blacks not seek to create new parishes of their own, unlike
or church of their own.
New churches of their own, unlike other faiths.
Yeah, a number of other faiths would have an African American branch that started off on its own because they couldn't integrate into the white community. So there are the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME, versus the Methodist Episcopal Church.
Exactly.
There are Black Baptists and then the Southern Baptists,
right,
and so on. So
and
that
all that came about as a result of black churchgoers believing that they weren't welcome in their own churches, and so they began to create churches of our own.
Okay, let's go to another studio question. Sir, where are you from?
I'm from Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. Father.
Good to have you here. Welcome. And what's your question?
My question is, was it widely known that defense attorney Black would subsequently become a member of the KKK? And if so, how was he appointed to the Supreme Court after that?
Yeah, excellent question, because today we can't imagine that anybody who had been associated with the Ku Klux Klan would be able to survive the scandal and take their seat on the United States Supreme Court. At the time that FDR appointed Hugo Black to the court, there isn't clear evidence that he knew of Hugo Black's past membership in the Klan. But there was an expose that was written by a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reporter that revealed it before he took his seat. And there was a scandal over it in the newspapers. Many people called for the nomination that had been already approved to be stopped. But Hugo Black survived it, and he took his seat.
Okay. As a matter of fact, Hugo Black's name is still on the county courthouse building.
Here in Birmingham.
Yeah, here in Birmingham.
Yes, and that took place many years later. And actually, you know, maybe this is a good part of the story that I tell in the book, is that eventually Hugo Black would go on to play a part in some very important civil rights decisions handed down by the United States Supreme Court, cases that surprised his friends and neighbors back in Birmingham, Alabama, and disappointed them. Cases like Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark decision where the court said that public schools needed to be desegregated. And
that was 1954.
1954. Also, 1967, Virginia against Loving, where the United States Supreme Court decided that it was unconstitutional to prohibit white people from marrying black people. And Hugo Black participated in both of those decisions. The court was unanimous that by that time in our history, those were unconstitutional events.
Right, right. All right. We have Joe on the line. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Father.
Hi, where are you from?
This question is for Professor Davies.
Okay.
I was wondering, since he's considered, Reverend Coyle is considered the martyr by the Church, what is the status of his canonization?
Well, it's a good question. I know that Bishop Baker here in Birmingham has had some conversations about investigating the possible status of Father Coyle, and I think those conversations are underway.
Okay, so it's something that's in a very preliminary stage.
I believe so.
But it hasn't gone to Rome yet.
No, not close to that, I don't think. Yeah.
Okay. We have another question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Fontana, California.
Oh, great. I know where that is.
I was
Pretty up there.
wondering what happened to the daughter Ruth and her husband Pedro.
Well, Ruth, after the events of the trial, unfortunately, their marriage didn't last. It fell apart. In fact, in the heavy publicity before the trial, it fell apart even before the trial was over. Ruth left the city. She went to Chicago, and she died a very young age. She never made it out of her 20s. She died of tuberculosis in a Chicago hospital. And Pedro stayed in Birmingham, but he was killed in a hit-and-run accident that happened on Valentine's Day, ironically, in Birmingham, just steps away from where Father Coyle had been shot.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Now, he also remarried.
He did remarry,
Right.
but no children.
No children.
And then he was killed in that accident.
Okay. We have another question for you from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
Decatur, Illinois.
Good to have you here. And what is your question?
After so many years, what sparked your interest to write this book? And did you have access to the records and cooperation in your research?
Yeah, I came upon it by accident. I was doing research for another article that I thought I was going to write, and I just tripped over a reference to this homicide trial that happened in Birmingham. And when I did, and I started looking into it, I was mesmerized by what happened here. I couldn't believe that no one had written a book about it, and I couldn't believe that, as someone who was raised Catholic, I couldn't believe that I'd never heard about this story. It seemed remarkable to me that a story that was a national sensation at the time involved a murder of an unarmed priest for all of these reasons that reflected who we are, who we were, what we were afraid of then, wasn't more widely known in America today. And so that captivated me, and I thought that I would write a book about it.
Now, she also asked about whether or not you were able to look at records. What kind of records were you able to look at?
I was very, very lucky because this was a case that happened in 1921 where it wasn't unusual for a city the size of Birmingham to have 3 large newspapers operating, some in the morning, some in the afternoon issues. And so there was a healthy paper trail from those papers. There was also papers reporting about it around the country. I had the trial transcript, the grand jury transcript, and the preliminary hearing transcript, fortunately. And I got a great gift from Father Richard Donahoe, who was the presiding priest of St. Paul's when I began to research this. And he opened the door of the rectory to me one summer and let me just camp out in his dining room and read years of notes, handwritten notes of Father James Coyle that really illustrated the rising tension that he was perceiving with his congregation during those years leading up to the shooting.
You know, one of the things that I would want people to note is that your book is full of footnotes. You give the sources so that if somebody else wanted to check on these resources, especially the court transcripts and the newspaper articles, they would be able to go and check on your research.
Right.
But you know, one of the things I liked about the book is that you were able to distinguish, you know, sometimes something came out in the morning paper, sometimes it came out in the evening paper, and they were scooping each other, and you had it in sequence so that the reader can see how the whole publicity was developing, you know, after the murder, and some of the things going on before the murder. So you have references to Father Coyle's letters to the editor and all, so that this information is present in the book, and the research is good quality. You know, I really like that.
Thank you. I mean, that's important to me as a scholar, obviously, but I also wanted to finally write something, Father, that my mother could read. And
right.
Law professors are very accustomed to writing law journal articles to each other and to the legal profession, but This is different. This is narrative nonfiction. Every word of it, unfortunately, is true, but it reads like, I hope, as you perceived it, it reads like a novel.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of this information, and though there are footnotes, it doesn't read in a geeky way. It reads like it would make a good movie about a law case. You could really do a good case about what was going on ahead of time and all that. Have you sold the film rights? Let's talk. And you, sir, where are you from?
I'm from Fontana, California.
Oh, great. And what's your question?
I was just curious as to what the population of Birmingham was at the time of this.
Birmingham was about 300,000 people at that time, and Catholics were a distinct minority. They were only 10% of the churchgoers of the area.
Right. And today, the city is somewhat smaller with the city limits. Within the city limits, there's a smaller population of only about 225,000, but there is a very large suburban area that's larger than the city. Now one of our suburbs has 300,000. Hoover has more people than the city of Birmingham does. And there are other suburbs as well. So the population in the area is probably between 800,000 and 1 million.
That is a very common problem, actually, for many of the cities in America today that we could do a whole other show on.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of the folks moved to the suburbs and all. But and Catholicism today in this diocese is only about 3% of the diocese. So now that includes not just Birmingham. In Birmingham, the Catholic population would be, a larger percentage than it is elsewhere in the state. There are many parts of the state where there are almost no Catholics. But for the diocese, we're about 3%, I'm told.
I see.
Ma'am, where are you from?
Hi, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh, great. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Every time somebody says that they're from Ohio, I want to say OH.
My question is, how long did it take you to write the book, and are you happy with how your peers and other people see it, and how they see it?
Well, it took me 3 years to research it, and it took me 2 years to write it.
That's a good long time.
A good amount of time. My daughter Heather was in high school at the time, and she read every chapter as I was writing it because I wanted her as kind of a test, as sort of similar to Ruth Stephenson, and she helped me quite a bit. But the response to the book has been probably the most gratifying thing that I have experienced as an author and scholar from the time of my joining Ohio State University. It's just been remarkable. This book and this story really, Father, touches people very deeply in many different ways and for different reasons. Some people, it touches them because of the religious aspect, some because of the racial aspect, some because of the legal shenanigans that were going on in the trial, some because of the gender issues that were on clear display in the case as well.
By gender issues, for instance, Ruth Stephenson, who became Ruth Gosman after she married, was under her father's rule. And one of the reasons she married was to get away from him. Once you could marry if you were an 18-year-old girl, right, and you didn't need your parents' permission. And once you're married, then you're under your husband. Right. Now, we would look at that kind of legal status as odd today, but that was the way that it was then.
Yeah, and the reporters of her day had a very hard time portraying her in a kind or understanding way. So that was part of the challenge, actually, of telling this story from a contemporary perspective today, when much of what was said about Ruth at the time was really ungenerous, and that's
very ungenerous.
Yes.
And well, again, the fact that she had betrayed her parents by becoming a Catholic.
Exactly. And not accepting their guidance about her religious direction, right?
Right.
I mean, people could not understand her independence at a time when actually independence on the part of females was not highly regarded.
No, not at all. And it was so important that Joe Tate, the prosecutor, did not even bring her in as a witness to the trial. Normally, her testimony about how badly her father had treated her when she became Catholic might have helped show that he had an anti-Catholic bias to begin with.
Right.
But she was treated so negatively by the press, he couldn't bring her in as a witness.
Ultimately, they decided that she would do them more harm than good, which was a real problem for the prosecutors. I will say about Joe Tate, since you bring him up, is that he also had a lot on the line here,
Right.
and I ended up having a lot of respect for the way in which he just pushed this case at least to a conclusion when he had a lot to lose.
Right. Well, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for writing this book. You can get Rising Road, A Tale of Love, Race, and Religion in America at catalog 1-800-854-6316 or EWTNReligiousCatalog.com. Thank you very much, and may the Lord bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, we want to remind you that we can bring you guests like Sharon Davies and others because you bring this network to you. You make it possible. Without your support, we cannot run. We cannot do the show. So please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill. And we'll be able to pay all of our bills and bring more of these programs to you. God bless you, and thank you very much.